You think you've reached your limit. Your chest is tight. Your legs feel like concrete. Your breath is short and shallow. And your mind steps in with a familiar lie. This is as far as you can go. That voice sounds reasonable. It sounds protective. It sounds like it cares about you. But that voice has never taken you to where you want to be. The 40% rule exists because the mind quits long before the body is actually done. The body is capable of more stress, more effort, more endurance than the mind is willing to tolerate. So when you feel that urge to stop, you're not meeting your limit. You're meeting your comfort threshold. Most people live their entire lives inside that threshold. They stop when it starts to hurt. They slow down when it becomes inconvenient. They quit when it becomes uncomfortable. And then they tell themselves a story that makes quitting feel justified. I tried my best. I gave it everything I had. This just isn't for me. But most of the time, that's not true. What they really mean is, I reached the point where it stopped feeling good. Discomfort is not danger. Pain is not the same as damage. Fatigue is not failure. But the mind treats all three as threats. The mind is designed to keep you alive, not to make you great. So the moment effort turns into suffering, the mind sounds the alarm. It tells you to back off. It tells you to stop. It tells you to choose the path that feels safe. That's how average is protected. That's how potential is buried. The 40% rule is a reminder that your feelings are not an accurate measure of your capacity. They are a measure of your conditioning. If you've trained yourself to quit when things get hard, hard will always feel impossible. But if you train yourself to stay in the fight, when your mind starts screaming, your threshold for discomfort expands. And with it, your capacity for growth. Most people are not weak. They are untrained in suffering. They've never learned how to sit inside discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. They've never practiced staying present when their body is tired and their mind is loud. So the first time life demands real effort from them, they fold. They mistake resistance for a stop sign. They mistake struggle for a signal to turn around. But resistance is the gatekeeper. Struggle is the doorway. Discomfort is the cost of entry. Every meaningful change in your life will ask you to tolerate something you don't want to feel. Pressure, doubt, fatigue, loneliness, boredom, pain. There is no path to a hardened mind that avoids these experiences. There is only the decision to face them or run from them. The 40% rule is not about recklessness. It's about honesty. Honesty about how often you stop early. Honesty about how quickly you look for an exit. Honesty about how many times you've chosen comfort over growth. Most people say they want more out of life. Very few people are willing to become the type of person who can handle more, because handling more means suffering more first. When you push past that first wave of, I'm done, you enter unfamiliar territory. Your breath feels heavier. Your muscles burn deeper. Your mind becomes louder. This is a point where your identity is challenged. The old version of you wants relief. The old version of you wants permission to quit. The old version of you wants to believe that this is unnecessary. And the new version of you is built by refusing to give that permission. Every time you stay in the fight, when your mind is begging for comfort, you lay another layer of armor on your mind. That armor is built from experience, from proof, from memory. You remember that you didn't die when it hurt. You remember that you didn't break when it was uncomfortable. You remember that the feeling passed, but the growth remained. This is how you build a callous mind, not through words, not through hype, but through repetition. You callous your hands by exposing them to friction. You callous your mind by exposing it to discomfort. At first, everything hurts. At first, everything feels overwhelming. At first, your tolerance is low. But over time, what once felt unbearable becomes normal. What once felt impossible becomes expected. What once felt extreme becomes your baseline. That's not talent. That's training. And the training begins the moment you stop believing the first voice that tells you to quit. Most people never test their real limits because they never stay long enough in the discomfort to find them. They back out at the first sign of pain. They retreat at the first sign of fatigue. They rationalize at the first sign of resistance. They confuse the beginning of suffering with the end of capacity. But the beginning of suffering is where capacity starts to expand. Your mind will always look for evidence that you should stop. It will point to your tiredness. It will point to your stress. It will point to your past failures. But your mind is not an objective coach. It is a risk-averse narrator. It tells stories that protect comfort. The 40% rule teaches you to question that narrator, to recognize that the first signal to stop is often a signal that you've just arrived at the place where growth happens. This is the line most people never cross. They step up to it. They feel the discomfort. They turn back, and then they live the rest of their lives wondering what was on the other side of that line. Crossing that line doesn't feel heroic. It feels lonely. It feels quiet. It feels like you're standing in a space where there's no applause and no validation. Most people only push hard when someone is watching. They work when they're praised. They show discipline when they're being judged. But the real work happens in isolation, in the moments when nobody will ever know how hard you pushed, in the moments when quitting would leave no visible consequence. That's where character is built. Your mind will look for an audience. It will look for permission. It will look for a reason to stop trying so hard when nobody seems to care. But discipline is not a performance. It's a standard you hold yourself to when no one is there to enforce it. The 40% rule forces you to confront how much of your effort is dependent on external pressure. If your intensity disappears when the spotlight does, you're not driven, you're managed by attention. The work that changes you is the work you do when nobody's watching. This is where the concept of storing proof becomes powerful. Every time you stay in the fight longer than you wanted to, you create a memory of resilience. You create evidence that you can endure discomfort. You create a record of effort that your mind can't easily erase. When the next challenge shows up, you don't face it empty-handed. You carry the weight of your past wins with you. Not the wins that were easy, the wins that hurt. Those memories become a reservoir you can draw from when you're tired, when your mind starts whispering that you're not built for this. When doubt tries to convince you that stopping is the smart choice, you remind yourself, you've been here before. You want to quit before. You didn't, and you survived it. This is how you slowly reprogram your response to discomfort. Instead of panic, you build familiarity. Instead of avoidance, you build tolerance. Instead of excuses, you build standards. Most people underestimate how much of their identity is shaped by what they repeatedly do when things get uncomfortable. If you repeatedly quit when it hurts, you become someone who quits when it hurts. If you repeatedly stay when it hurts, you become someone who can stay when it hurts. Identity is not what you claim. It's what your patterns reveal. The 40% rule is a tool to break patterns that keep you small. It interrupts the automatic behavior of backing off at the first sign of strain. But interruption alone is not enough. You have to replace the old response with a new one. Instead of asking, "Can I stop?" you ask, "What does it look like to keep going right now?" Instead of waiting for motivation, you act in alignment with your standards. Motivation is unreliable. It shows up when conditions are easy. It disappears when conditions are hard. Standards don't disappear. They don't care how you feel. They don't negotiate with your mood. Standards define what you do on your worst days. This is where most people realize that they've been building their lives on feelings instead of principles. Feelings change. Principles don't. When your actions are guided by feelings, your effort is inconsistent. When your actions are guided by standards, your effort becomes predictable. Predictable effort compounds. Inconsistent effort resets progress. The 40% rule is the moment you choose to act according to a standard instead of a feeling. That standard might be simple. I don't quit when things get uncomfortable. At first, that standard will feel unnatural. It will feel forced. It will feel heavy. That's because you're building a new identity. You're stepping out of a pattern that once felt normal. Your mind resists because the old pattern is familiar. But familiarity is not the same as alignment. Just because something feels normal doesn't mean it's good for you. Growth requires you to betray the habits that kept you safe, but small. Every time you choose to stay in the discomfort a little longer, you create distance between who you've been and who you're becoming. And that distance is uncomfortable. But discomfort is the price of transformation. Transformation doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a ceremony. It happens quietly in the repetition of hard choices, You don't wake up one day and suddenly become disciplined. You wake up one day and realize you've been choosing discipline for so long that it feels normal. The 40% rule teaches you that the edge you fear is not the edge that will break you. It's the edge that reveals you. When you stay in the discomfort past the point where your mind wants to escape, you start to see parts of yourself you've never had to confront. Your impatience, your tendency to look for shortcuts, your desire for instant relief. Most people spend their lives trying to manage discomfort instead of mastering it. They structure their routines to avoid strain. They build their schedules around what feels easy. They choose environments that protect them from being tested. But you don't build strength in protected environments. You build strength by exposing yourself to stress in controlled doses. The 40% rule is one of those controlled doses. It's a deliberate decision to go further than you think you can, not recklessly, but intentionally. You're not chasing pain for the sake of pain. You're chasing the expansion that comes after you survive it. This is where the mind begins to change. At first, discomfort feels like an emergency. Your heart rate spikes. Your thoughts race. Your urge to stop feels urgent and real. But when you repeatedly stay in the discomfort and nothing catastrophic happens, your nervous system learns that the feeling is tolerable. It learns that you can exist inside strain without collapsing. Over time, the signal changes. What once felt like a crisis starts to feel like a challenge. What once felt unbearable starts to feel demanding but manageable. What once felt overwhelming starts to feel like work. This is a callousing process. You don't numb yourself to discomfort. You train yourself to function inside it. That distinction matters. Numbing is avoidance. Callousing is adaptation. One shrinks your world. The other expands it. Most people numb themselves with distractions, with comfort, with entertainment, with excuses that make inaction feel reasonable. But numbing never builds capacity. It only delays the moment when discomfort returns. The 40% rule invites you to stop numbing and start adapting. It invites you to feel the resistance fully instead of escaping it, to stay present in the difficulty instead of checking out mentally, to learn from the sensation instead of running from it. This presence is where control is built. When you can stay present in discomfort, you're no longer controlled by it. You start to notice that discomfort comes in waves. It spikes. It peaks. It fades. If you ride the wave instead of running from it, you see that the urge to quit is temporary. Most people quit at the peak. They never stay long enough to feel the drop. But the drop is where confidence is built. Because once you've ridden that wave a few times, you stop believing that the peak is permanent. You stop treating every surge of discomfort like a final verdict on your capacity. You start to see it as part of the process. And when discomfort becomes part of the process, instead of a signal to stop, your relationship with effort changes. You no longer wait for the work to feel easy. You accept that the work will feel hard, and you show up anyway. This is how consistency is born, not from feeling good, but from choosing to act regardless of how you feel. The 40% rule is a practice in separating your actions from your emotions. You still feel tired. You still feel resistance. You still feel the urge to stop. You just don't let those feelings make the decision for you. That's what mental toughness actually looks like. Not the absence of discomfort, but the presence of control in the middle of it. At some point, the struggle stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a mirror. It shows you exactly who you are. When there's no comfort left to hide behind, when you're stripped of motivation, stripped of energy, stripped of excuses, what's left is your standard. And that standard determines how far you go. The 40% rule isn't about proving something to the world. It's about proving something to yourself. It's about reaching the point where your mind says, this is too much, and choosing to take one more step anyway. Not because it feels good, not because it's impressive, but because you decided that quitting is no longer part of your identity. Every time you take that extra step, you break a contract with your old self, the version of you that always looked for an exit, the version of you that negotiated with weakness, the version of you that needed perfect conditions to perform. And you sign a new contract with the person you're becoming, a person who shows up when it's hard, a person who stays when it hurts, a person who doesn't need motivation to keep moving forward. This is how the mind changes, not through promises, but through proof. Proof that you can suffer and survive. Proof that you can stay when everything in you wants to run. Proof that your limits are further away than you were taught to believe. That proof doesn't come from one heroic moment. It comes from hundreds of small, ugly decisions to keep going. Days when you feel strong. Days when you feel weak. Days when you're tired of being tired. Days when you question why you even started. Those are the days that shape you. Anyone can perform when conditions are perfect. Only the disciplined can perform when conditions are brutal. The 40% rule exists for the moments when your excuses feel convincing, when your reasons to stop sound logical, when your mind presents quitting as a responsible choice. That's the moment to recognize the pattern. That's the moment to understand that comfort is trying to reclaim control. And that's the moment to take one more step. Not 10 more steps, not some dramatic leap. One more step. Because that one step is never just one step. It's a signal to your identity. It's a message to your mind. It's a statement of who's in charge. Over time, those single steps stack. They become distance. They become momentum. They become proof. And proof changes what you believe about yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone who quits early. You start seeing yourself as someone who finishes what they start. You stop identifying with your limitations. You start identifying with your standards. That shift is quiet, but it's permanent. And once that shift happens, you don't need speeches. You don't need hype. You don't need perfect conditions. You just need the decision to not stop when it gets uncomfortable. Because the truth is simple. The moment you think you're done, you're probably not even close. And the life you say you want is waiting on the other side.